Hello and welcome back to my channel, this little corner of the internet where we like to rant and we like to rave about things, and by we, I do of course mean me. This coffee is cold, but that's okay, whatever, I'll drink it anyway. Ugh. Today we are going to be talking about some of my favorite pieces of zombie media, the 28 Days Later movies. Why, you ask, have we moved from The Last Kingdom to 28 Days Later? And that's because I love it. That's because I love it and I wanted to talk about it. So that's that. Before we get started in there, I wanted to talk about something else. I wanted to show you something that I've been working on this week. I've been getting into my favorite little pastime, whittling. And I wanted to show you first this bear. Here he is. Look at him in all his glory. This is one of the first pieces I've whittled since returning to the United States of America. And then this is the other guy I made. Look at him. He was supposed to be a fox. How do I hold this? There we go. He was supposed to be a fox, but I cut off half his head on accident, so now he has to he looks kind of like a squirrel. So I've decided he's a squirrel. These are things I've been whittling this week. I did not cut myself this time. Unlike last time. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm not a huge fan of zombie movies, not typically, or zombie media in general. The first reason being I hate zombies. I hate them. I hate how they move. I hate how they look. I mean, they actually usually look really cool from like a special effects standpoint. I always like how different people interpret zombies. When I say I hate how they look, I mean I hate how they look when they run. So shout out to Danny Boyle, who made the 28 Days Later movie, for making running zombies. Because every piece of media since then, they run, and I hate it. I hate it every time. While I'm playing Fallout, if I run into a ghoul, I go, I hate them, I hate them, I hate them. I always shoot them in the legs because it makes them stop running. I just don't like that. It's also my huge problem with spiders. I have a huge fear of spiders, and part of my problem is I don't like how they move. It really, really, really bothers me. And I feel the same way about zombies. So, well, I guess in The Walking Dead, they don't always run. So I guess I'm fine with that. But the other thing that I don't like about typical zombie media is the hopelessness. It's just like, and then the world ends and everyone is sad all the time. And that just really, really bothers me. I tend to be an optimistic person. I like to believe that there is good in this world. I like to believe that when things get bad, people come together and try to make things better. And is that me having the blinders on? Yeah. So I know that that's not how the world is, and I think watching media that perpetuates the idea that I just like the escapism of being able to be like, there is good in the world, people will help each other when it comes down to it, and I prefer to engage in media that does show that. And zombie movies don't. Zombie movies are like, everything is bad all the time. So, like The Walking Dead, I can only get through about 3 seasons typically of The Walking Dead before I'm just burnt out with everything is bad. I'm trying to escape the world and I'm in a place that's worse. I do really enjoy The Walking Dead. I think it's I love the characters. They will never actually convince me to hate Lori. I'm so sorry. Maybe that's controversial. I will never hate Lori. I'm standing by her side. Anyway, that's not what this is about. But I do really enjoy a lot of the aspects of Walking Dead. I just can't consume it for that long before I just feel bad about everything. So, yeah, I wrote in my notes, killed by the length, which I think is accurate. So I usually get to the prison and partway through the prison arc before I'm just like, this is too much for my brain. I've also seen World War Z. I don't really remember much about it. I remember really liking the opening. I thought that was really cool. Both the 28 Days Later movies, I guess the first one specifically, the 28 Days Later movie, and The Walking Dead don't include the fallout, like the immediate aftermath of the virus outbreak or whatever it is that caused the disease. World War Z does, and it is incredibly, it's just like insane. World War Z and 28 Weeks Later also has a virus outbreak. Both of them are crazy. And I think that's pretty much the only part about World War Z that I liked, other than by Peter Capaldi. Okay. The best thing about World War Z is Peter Capaldi being a Who doctor. That is my favorite part. That's all that was supposed to be about. Okay. Resident Evil is another zombie media that I've consumed. Not the games. I've only seen the movies with Mila Jovovich, and then the Raccoon City movie. I saw the first Resident Evil movie when I was probably like 7 or 8. I think it was my first rated R movie. I don't remember much about it. I don't remember much about how the zombies work in those movies, like lore wise. But I do really remember liking Raccoon City, the movie that came out recently. So I've not played the games because, like I said, I don't like zombies. I panic. I've also never played Call of Duty. Is it Black Ops that has the zombies? I would die. Like, not me as the character that I'm playing would die, me as a human being. I think if I had to play a whole game, the new Silent Hill F, they're not technically zombies. They're not zombies at all, but I don't like how those ladies move. I watched Hollow. I watched all of his Silent Hill F, and first of all, I was very confused. If anyone knows what that game is about, let me know. I didn't like how those ladies moved. It really bothered me. It's like a combination between a ballerina and a zombie. A ballerambi, if one might even say that. More media. I already talked about Fallout, but I hate them. I hate the ghouls in Fallout. Obviously the feral ghouls, the normal ghouls who are people are fine. I don't like how the feral ghouls move, their flailing arms, the way they go slow and then they go fast. It really freaks me out. They did a great job in the TV show with the few feral ghouls that they had. I watched Shaun of the Dead, is that what it's called, I think, a long time ago. I'm not huge into comedy, so I don't remember anything about it. There you go. Obviously The Last of Us. I've never played the video game. Again, I don't do well with zombies. I did really like in the TV show, I only watched the first season, but I did like the lore, I guess, behind the zombies, that it's a fungus. Probably the scariest thing they could have chosen. Worse even than the rage virus in 28 Days Later. But I really did like that. I do, though, feel like for a zombie show, there weren't very many zombies in it. Other than like the few times when there was a lot of zombies, there just weren't very many zombies. Yeah, so those are like the main zombie media that I've consumed that I can think of. I have notes, by the way, in case you wonder why I'm looking like down. I have notes and I'm reading them. This is my notebook for my dissertation that I wrote last summer, and now it's full of notes on zombies. So kind of how we're going to do this video is I'm going to go through each movie and tell you what I loved about them and what I didn't like, maybe. And then I have some other things to say. And I'm going to talk about, I really want to talk about the rage virus specifically at some point. And then a basic conclusion. So 28 Days Later, I would say, is one of the best zombie movies that I've ever seen. And if we're going to be real, maybe one of the best movies I've ever seen. I remember sitting there watching it with my parents, feeling so anxious, but like so anxious that I didn't realize that it was made by the movie, if that makes sense. Like I remember texting my friend and just being like, girl, I don't know what's going on, but like I feel like I just feel so full of anxiety. My heart is pounding. I don't know what's happening. But then the movie ended and it went away, and I was like, oh. Oh, okay. So they really just did such a fabulous job handcrafting the environment to make you feel the way that the characters are feeling. And I felt it. I did. I felt it. I felt it so realistically that I didn't even realize that they had done that to me. But I think a lot of it does come down to the sound design and the visuals. Those two things are underutilized, I think, in a lot of film now. But the way that they did that movie particularly really stuck with me. The rage virus, which is the whole impetus for the movie. I think the rage virus is so well done. We'll talk about it a lot more later. I'll go through the science behind it. But I think it's really well done. I guess technicality wise, this isn't a zombie movie. They're not dead. They're infected. So they're the infected. This is my quotation marks because I can't do it because I'm holding. Okay, whatever. You don't care. They're not technically zombies, but I'm calling them zombies because it's essentially what they are. But I really love the rage virus. I think it's well explained enough in the film that it doesn't feel like exposition dumpy at the beginning, and it also doesn't confuse those of us who don't understand biology or virology or like human anatomy to the extent to understand why it's doing what it's doing. We don't really care. We just know they're angry and they're killing each other. But for those people who are more into the science aspect, there is also enough later shown to understand why what happens with some, movie magic, obviously. So for those of you who don't know, who have never seen 28 Days Later, it is a film that was released in 2002, I think, 2003. It was directed by Danny Boyle, who has also, what else has he done? He has done let's see, Trainspotting. I've heard of that. 127 Hours. Oh, I guess he also did 28 Years Later. Interesting. I have opinions about that. Okay. So directed by Danny Boyle, and the main cast is Cillian Murphy. Some of you might know who that is. Cillian Murphy, Naomi Harris, who plays Selena. Brendan Gleeson is in it, known father of Domhnall Gleeson. I'm pretty sure that's his dad. It looks like him. He started working in 1984. Something else you guys need to know about me, that 1984, it is Domhnall Gleeson's father. 1984 is it's a curse. Not a curse. Everything happens in 1984. I have a list of things that happened in 1984, and it's an extensive list. Okay, that's all. We'll talk about that maybe some other time. Domhnall Gleeson is in it. Christopher Eccleston is in it. We've got some big names in it. As far as I'm aware, this is Cillian Murphy's big first thing. I could be wrong about that. Correct me if I'm wrong. It follows a man named Jim, who is played by Cillian Murphy, and he wakes up from a coma in the middle of a hospital 28 days after the zombie apocalypse has broken out. So this might sound familiar for fans of The Walking Dead. They obviously very, very clearly took inspiration from the opening of 28 Days Later for the opening of The Walking Dead. And I'm cool with that. I think that's really cool homage to 28 Days Later to me is the Lost Boys of vampire lore. Obviously you have Interview with a Vampire, Anne Rice, and you also have Lost Boys. These two pieces of media I think are what made vampires sexy. They went from being, I could be wrong, I'm not a vampire lore-ologist, especially not in media, but there's a very distinct difference between Dracula, Nosferatu, scary vampire who will kill you and eat you when you want to run away from him, and Interview with a Vampire and Lost Boys, where they're edgy and hot and you want to sleep with them and let them eat you. And it's not so scary. You know what I'm saying? So in the way that kind of changed vampire media, now we have Vampire Diaries, Twilight, every vampire media that you can think of. where vampires are cool and hot, I feel like 28 Days Later kind of was a hinge point for zombie movies. And a lot of zombie films from then on kind of have similar qualities as 28 Days Later. That was a tangent that was unnecessary, but wanted you to know about that. So 28 Days Later does open up with how the outbreak occurs, and you are introduced to a very dark scientific lab where they're running experiments on, I believe they're chimpanzees. They're apes of some kind. And there are animal rights activists who have broken in to free the apes. However, the apes are infected. This is in Cambridge in England. This whole movie takes place in England. So these animal rights activists break into this lab with the desire to release these apes that they have heard are being kept there and tested on. And they release the apes anyway, only for them to start mauling the people, and then the people are infected with this rage virus. We don't see it leave the institute where they're testing, the laboratory, but then we are shifted to 28 Days Later, which is both a time jump and also obviously the title of the movie. And this is where we meet Jim in the hospital. Jim wakes up in the hospital and he's in the middle of London, England. So big, massive city. And there's just no one. It's dead silent. I don't know what camera they used for this film, but it has this very lo-fi quality, and I've seen a lot of people talking about it, and not always in a very positive light, but I really like it. I really think it makes everything look so otherworldly, like we had also woken up from a coma that we'd been in since before the zombie apocalypse, and all of a sudden there's just no one. Everyone is gone. And I've never been to London, but I've been to big cities. It's so eerily weird when they're quiet. They don't get quiet very often unless you're, wandering around at 4 o'clock in the morning. But even then, there's something. Some car is driving somewhere. Someone is sneezing. Someone is snoring in their sleep. Someone is yelling. There's a cat. But London at this point is dead silent. It's very eerie. He goes into a church where one of the most gut-dropping scenes, honestly. He goes into a church where there's this mass of bodies, just bodies in the pews. And he calls, he's like, hello. They're very clearly dead, but he has seen no one. He's been wandering around London for who knows how long. He's seen no one. He calls out to these massive bodies, and two of them perk up. Like if you've ever seen a dog and you go, you want a treat? And they perk up. It was just like that. And these two gaunt-eyed, red-eyed men just staring at him. Oh, yeah, my gut dropped when I saw that. And Jim is attacked by a priest, and it's a very interesting moment because Jim is Irish, which is something that we will talk about later as well. The Irish are known for their connections with Catholicism, and so he's in this Catholic church, and he's being attacked by a Catholic priest, and he has to defend himself, and all he has is a bag full of Pepsi cans. And you can see him after he's hit the priest, and he's asking for forgiveness, and it's just a very intense scene. And this is one of the first moments that you get music as he's running away, and then he meets two other survivors, a woman named Selena and her boyfriend. I don't remember what his name is, but they kind of do the exposition dump of, it's not even an exposition dump, they just tell him the world ended and there's a bunch of zombies everywhere now and this is our life. The boyfriend is a much lighter personality, he's joking around. Selena is very serious, at least a lot more serious. Jim wants to go find his parents, so Jim, Selena, and this other man go to find Jim's parents, I think somewhere in the outskirts of London. When they get there, Jim's parents are dead. They killed themselves in order to not have to endure the virus. There's this heartbreaking moment when he finds a picture of them as a family, and on the back is a letter written to Jim. And it's because, like I said, he's been in a coma this whole time. When his parents wrote this letter and, took their own lives to avoid the virus, it says something on the back to the point of we didn't want to have to live through this. I hope you can understand. And then that the bottom part just says, "Don't wake up, Jim." Holy moly. You know things are bad when a mother writes to her son that she would rather him be in a coma and or dead than have to endure what the world is. I actually forgot to tell you what happened. I can't believe this. When they're at Jim's house, they get attacked by zombies, and Selena's boyfriend is bitten. And before he turns, she kills him. Like, he hasn't turned yet, and she kills him, hacks him to pieces with her machete. Because the zombies are attracted by light and sound, so guns obviously will attract zombies, but also, this is England. They don't have guns. Like, I mean, I know people have guns in England, but it's not like the United States where most people, or a large portion of people, have guns. So, like, regular old Selena isn't just going to have access to a gun, so she has a machete. So she hacks her boyfriend to bits, and she's telling Jim, if you're bitten, like, I won't hesitate to kill you. I'll kill you in a heartbeat. A very important piece of information that I forgot to tell you. After this, they run into another band of survivors, a father and a daughter. Frank, who is played by Domhnall Gleeson, and Hannah, his daughter. And they are living in their apartment and kind of keeping safe, but I think they're running out of water. I think that's the problem. Frank has been listening to this radio station of these military folk saying, we have the answer, we have safety, come find us. So the group decide to go find these military men. And as they're traveling out of London, they run into a couple more zombies. Something that I really love about this movie is there is so much that's just about finding people. Actually, before I talk about that, I have to talk about Selena again. Selena is very serious. She's very hardened. Only 28 days into this. I say only, but that's like not a month. That is not even a month, and there are only 28 days into this, and she's already completely hardened. She is very cynical. She believes that all there is to life is survival. And Jim doesn't want to believe that, but he's also only been in this world for less than a day by the time they meet Frank and Hannah. He doesn't really, like, get the world like she does. This coffee is so cold. So that's why only Jim and Selena are with Frank and Hannah while they're traveling. I think it's north. I would imagine London is pretty far south. I think they're going north or northeast or northwest or something. And this is the time when, you know, they have the quintessential gotta go to the supermarket and take all of the goods out of the supermarket, like, montage. And you see there's moments where, like, Jim goes to grab a bottle of alcohol and Frank is like, only take the stuff that matters, and he grabs like the top shelf alcohol. And that moment is, I think it's very nice because, you know, it's played off as a joke, but like the idea that in this world you have to take the best of what you can because, like, that's all you can do. You know, why take the bottom shelf stuff when you have the top shelf stuff? Why settle for something that is lesser than when you can have something that's greater? I know it's such a kind of maybe reading too much into that scene, but I'm gonna read into it. You know, you have Hannah taking all the candy bars and whatnot, because she's probably like 15, 16. She's not like a young girl, but she's also not a grown-up. There's also a scene when they're driving, they get out of the city and they're in like the hills, sort of, I guess. And there's these 4 horses running through the hills, and you obviously have your 4 characters and then your 4 horses. It's a very clear metaphor of like freedom, and the animals are untouched by what is happening. The only animals that it seems like are carriers are crows, potentially. And that's from the 3rd movie. I'm taking way too long to explain this. Anyway, they go to find the military men. They're not there. Frank kind of has a moment. He gets... Oh, no, I have to talk about... Okay, well... Selena and Jim kind of get together. Obviously, we knew it was coming. They have a little moment out in the woods when they're still on their way to where the military people are. Now we get to the military place. It's just like a street that's been blocked off. Not a street, I would say, more of a highway, a motorway, and it's blocked off, and there is no military. They're gone. Frank has a kind of a freak out. This man who has been very father figure, the one who is like promoting hope and believes most staunchly that they can make it, and he's the one who breaks down, obviously. He yells at Hannah. He just has a moment. He walks away to calm down, and as he is walking away, he hears a sound. He looks up, and there's a crow eating a dead body, and out of the crow's beak drops a bit of blood, and this virus is passed through blood and saliva. So this drop of blood drops into his eye. He's infected. It's interesting because the rate of infection is incredibly fast in this series, about 10, anywhere between 10 and 30 seconds. And for Frank, it is a significant amount of time because, you can talk about it's more dramatic that way. But I like to think that Frank is so full of love and hope that it takes longer for the chemical rage chemical to permeate. That's my belief, and I'll stand 10 toes down on that. Love Frank, R.I.P. And it's important to note that neither Selena nor Jim kill him. Selena, who was in a heartbeat I would kill you, is not capable of killing Frank. Part of it is because she's too busy holding Hannah back, trying to protect Hannah, which is very important, very like Selena. Jim, likewise, also cannot kill him. And Frank is shot and killed by a military man. Whoa, where did he come from? Now we enter the third act, and the tone just massively shifts in a good way. Well, into a very bad way, but in a way that's consistent with the movie is what I mean. So Jim, Selena, and Hannah are brought to a military base. There are 9, I want to say, men there. They're all very young, other than Christopher Eccleston, who is the leader, and there is a Scottish man there, whose name I don't remember. I don't remember any of their names. So you'll have this Scottish man, Christopher Eccleston, and everyone else. That's what we're working with in terms of names. And at first, it's very much oh, this is great. There's food, it's safe, they have guns, because they're in the military, they can protect us, all of this stuff. It very, very quickly is proven that this is not a safe place, especially not for Selena and especially not for Hannah. They also have one of their soldiers had been turned at one point, and he is now a zombie, but he is chained up in the courtyard. They keep him there because the leader, Christopher Eccleston, wants to know how long it will take before he starves, essentially. And I don't remember a lot of what happens other than a lot of philosophizing. The Scottish man is we're in quarantine, no one's coming. We are they're not coming to save us. We are here forever. And he seems like the pessimist, but he's actually the most pragmatic. He's actually thinking very logically. And when it comes down to, I guess, the plot twist, if you want to say it like that, when it comes down to the plot twist of what these military men and their intentions are, the Scottish man is the only one who does not engage, or does not want to engage, and actively fights back against what Christopher Eccleston and these other men want to do to Hannah and Selena. So Christopher Eccleston essentially tells Jim that his plan, the only way he can keep morale up for these men, to keep them alive, is to promise them women. Disgusting and vile. And that's kind of the moment where Jim and the entire audience goes, you know when they do that in movies where they they pull the camera out, but also, or they zoom in while they're pulling the camera out, and it's whoa, that's kind of the moment. They don't do that because they just don't, that's not the kind of movie we're watching, but it kind of feels very much like that. It killed me to put that tumor in her head of ego in Guardians of the Galaxy 2. And we very quickly realize Selena and Hannah are less safe in this building than they were out in the world. And Jim realizes it as well. He doesn't want any part of it. Neither does the Scottish man. The Scottish man and Jim are locked up in the basement. And Selena, in an attempt to protect Hannah, gives her a whole heap ton of sleeping drugs or something. It's not sleeping drugs. It's something. It was so that she won't feel it, essentially, and she won't feel present. So Hannah takes these drugs, and she spends the rest of the movie high, out of her mind, which I'm actually very glad for her, because that would be crazy. Jim and the Scottish man are taken out back, and they're going to be shot and killed. The Scottish man fights back. He is killed. Jim pretends to be killed, but is not dead. And then we enter probably one of the best climaxes of anything I've ever seen. Maybe not ever, but it's really in my mind right now, and I think it is. He goes back, and he is going to get some vengeance, and he's going to get his girls. And he starts by releasing the infected that is in the building already, the soldier. He releases him, and it's pouring down rain. It's dark. It's in the middle of the night, and we have an infected running around this building, and we have Jim. What we get from the score, I haven't talked about John Murphy yet, but trust I will talk about John Murphy. What we get from the score is probably, again, one of the best things, the best scores of anything maybe ever. I don't want to say ever, because Theoden King by Howard Shore exists, and that is the best piece of orchestral music. Anyway, John Murphy, In the House in a Heartbeat. And you might recognize In a Heartbeat. We'll come back to it. But In the House in a Heartbeat is just, it's phenomenal. It's very simple. The melody is very simple, but the way it progresses, and with the visuals of what you're seeing, it is one of the most amazing things ever. Pardon me if you heard that. That was my tummy growling. So now we have these men, these 9 or 10-ish men, being absolutely obliterated by the infected, and Jim, who's looking for Selena and Hannah, trying to get them out. He, in and of himself, is acting very similar to how you would see the infected. We know he's not infected, but someone else might not. And eventually he does find them. They're being held by this one particularly awful man. He kills him. I think he does the whole thumb in the eyes thing. Maybe. It's very gross. There's actually surprisingly not a lot of gore in this movie for it being a zombie movie. He kills the guy, and then he stands up and he turns towards Selena, who does not know that he is not infected. She goes in for him with a machete, with her trusty dusty machete. She's gonna cut his head off, but she pauses at the last second, and she looks at him, and she realizes that he's not infected. Obviously, the infected, when they're first turned, might not look very different from humans, other than their vibrant red eyes. All their capillaries have burst. But she looks at him, and she knows he's not infected. She does say earlier, when she killed her boyfriend, that she knew by the look on his face that he was infected, and that was why she killed him. And so we can then assume that she knew by the look on Jim's face that he was not infected, because he was not afraid of her. He wasn't ooh, don't think I'm infected. He was just angry because of what these people were going to do to his friends. He says something, I can't remember exactly what he says, but he says something about points out the In a Heartbeat thing, that she was supposed to kill him in a heartbeat and she didn't. It's their motif or something. It's so cute. So Hannah's the one driving the car, and they're leaving. Christopher Eccleston's character is in the car for some reason. I don't remember why. Or maybe he jumps on the back of the car, something happens. They end up killing him, but Jim, the character, also ends up getting pretty badly injured, and we have a time skip, nondescript amount of time, and Jim wakes up in a cottage in a very beautiful place by a lake. I'd have to say maybe the Scottish Highlands, maybe just some place with hills in England, and Selena and Hannah have been making this sign for people who are flying over to come and pick them up, and at first it just says hell, but then there's an O and it's hello. So it's not a warning, it's a message of hey, we're alive, come get us. And that's how it ends. It ends on a very hopeful note with a person coming in on a plane. Well, the plane flies overhead, and they're cheering, and the assumption is that they're found. Pretty grim movie, but with a very hopeful ending, and that's that. And I'm gonna not take as long to explain the next 2 movies, because there's just not as much to them in my opinion, and also B, because this is already long enough. So the next movie is 28 Weeks Later, and we start with a family, a husband and a wife in a house, boarded up with a bunch of other people. At first, you don't know what's going on, but it's clear that they're hiding from the zombies. These are a group of survivors, and they are attacked. the man abandons his wife and escapes himself. And then the man escapes, and then we skip to 28 weeks later after the outbreak, and you have members of like NATO who have infiltrated England, I guess, and have kind of cleared out a safe space in a city that they have referred to, I think, as the Isle of Dogs or something. And people are being returned from outside of England back to this place. They're resettling, I guess, England, because the zombies have died. The infected had, after these 28 weeks, the infected have passed away, starved. There's no one else to eat. And in this group of new settlers are these two kids, and these are the kids of the couple from the beginning. Also, Robert Carlyle is the father. Amazing. He does a great job. Who else is in that movie? Idris Elba is in it, and Jeremy Renner, and the guy who plays, I think his name is Mike in Lost. Michael? Is that the dad or is that the son? Well, anyway, the guy who plays the dad in Lost of the father-son duo, he is in it as well, and he's an American soldier, and so is Jeremy Renner. And then the actress Julie Garner, something like that, she's in it as well, and she is a doctor. These two kids return home. Their dad tells them that their mom was killed in an attack, but he escaped. He does not say that he abandoned her, but he did abandon her. The two kids, like stupid little idiots, they leave the quarantine safe zone to go find their home, and when they get home, they discover that their mom is in fact alive. She is infected, but she is not contagious. No, that's not true. She's infected, but she is pretty asymptomatic. You can see that she has heterochromia, and one of her eyes has that red capillary burst in the white of her eye. Her son also has heterochromia. This is important. They take her back to the compound. The doctor lady, Miss Garner, discovers that she is infected. She is contagious. However, she's asymptomatic, more or less. Her odd behavior is either because she has been attacked and bitten several times and has been running for her life and on her own for weeks and weeks and weeks, or it is because she does have some symptoms of the rage virus, but not all of them. So, her husband, feeling guilty, goes to see her, kisses her. However, as we discussed earlier, the virus passes between people through both blood and saliva. So when they're kissing, they're swapping spit, and he gets the rage virus, and he brutally murders her. Like, it's really brutal. It's really bad. The first movie, there's not as much blood and gore. This one, they're like, no, there's a lot of blood and gore. And so unlike the first movie, this one we do get to see the outbreak. And it's honestly it's chaos, because you have this place, the Isle of the Dogs, that's full of people in a small area. I think there's like 15,000 people, and this outbreak occurs. You essentially have a command from Idris Elba to shoot the infected. They have like snipers all up, and those are all the Americans. Jeremy Renner is playing one of those snipers. Their command is to shoot the infected. When that doesn't solve the problem, because there's swarms of people, it's impossible to tell, they are then told to just shoot and kill everyone. Jeremy Renner participates in this for a while. Let me fix this. I think it's okay. There we go. Until he just can't, and he leaves his post, and he finds a group of survivors, including Miss Garner, the doctor, and then the two children, and some other people who are unimportant because they all die. And they are trying to escape because the guy from Lost tells them that essentially they're going to bomb the city and kill everyone. So he's trying to get them out. Miss Garner tells him that the boy and the girl could potentially be the cure, because their mother had some kind of genetic immunity, and so they believe that these children could possibly have a cure. So goal absolute A is to get these children off of the island being England. So they're going to meet up with the guy from Lost who is in a helicopter. They're going to try to meet him, and they have to escape. Jeremy Renner dies. He's killed by NATO soldiers because they're told to kill everyone. So they're trying to kill everyone. And then Julie Garner, forgive me if that's not her name, she is killed by Robert Carlyle, who is hunting his children, which is an important thing to note for the science portion as well. Robert Carlyle does end up biting his son whose name is Andy, and his daughter shoots him and kills him. Andy is like his mother, asymptomatic. You see the capillaries in his eyes have burst, but other than that, he does not seem to be symptomatic of the rage virus, but he is a carrier, as we learned that his mother was. The boy and the girl get on the helicopter, and Mr. Guy from Lost takes them away. At the end of the movie, we do see zombies infected making their way to Paris through the underground tunnel, I guess, through the channel. This movie came out in 2007. I don't think Danny Boyle was working with it, on it. Give me 1 second. Let me look that up. 28 weeks. No, it was directed by Juan Carlos Fresnadillo. So, slay. Not Danny Boyle. It's not even Julie Garner. It's Rose Byrne. Am I the dumbest person? I am the dumbest person on the planet. Sorry, everyone. So that's the end of 28 Weeks Later. 28 Years Later, it obviously takes place 28 years later, and it's about this community of people who live on a small island off the coast of England that's connected to England through a land bridge, and that comes and goes with the tide. And we are following Aaron Taylor Johnson and his son as they go out on his son's first, mission to the mainland. I guess the point is to scout for supplies and stuff, but it's just kind of like one of those first coming-of-age things for this young boy who was born in the midst of the apocalypse. After the apocalypse has happened, he's never known anything other than this island. He's probably 12. His mother is incredibly sick. We don't know with what. But while he's out on this mission, we learn that there are now more than simply the main infected. There are 3 other variants called crawlers, the emaciated, and alphas. These come into play during the science portion of this video. They are attacked several times. They fight them off. They see a fire in the distance, and Aaron Taylor Johnson tells his son that there is a doctor who is really freaking weird and piles up bodies of both dead people and the infected once they have died again, and then burns them, and he just is weird, and he lives over there. The boy and his father are chased back to the place where they live on the island by an alpha, and then they have this big old party, and we find out that the father is cheating on the sick mother with another woman, whose name is Rosie. I don't know why I remember that specifically, and the name of no one else in this movie, just Rosie. And the boy catches his father and becomes very angry, goes home, takes care of his mom, and then decides that he is going to take his mom to see that doctor. He blows up at his dad. They have this row about Rosie and his treatment of the mom, and then the boy schemes and gets his mom off the island. There's a group of, I think they're Swedish soldiers who crash landed on the island. They weren't supposed to touch foot on the island, because once they do that, then they have no chance of coming back. No one's going to come get them. So these Swedish soldiers are just on the run, and one of them, I think his name is Sven, perhaps, he runs into the boy and his mom, and they're going around together for a little bit until they come across a pregnant infected woman, and she's giving birth. The mother helps this infected woman give birth, and then immediately after, the Swedish man kills the pregnant infected woman after the birth has been finished, tries to kill the baby, who does not appear to be infected, and both mother and son are trying to protect the baby from the Swedish soldier, and he is then killed by an alpha, who is most likely the baby's father. So then we have mother, son, and baby. Son takes mother to the doctor, who is played by Ralph Fiennes, and he has what he calls his bone temple, and this is a place where he is just stacking a bunch of bones of people, make them look like trees, like femurs and probably spines as well. I don't know, you didn't really see any, but he made them look into like trees. And then in the center he has this monument of skulls, and that's where they put the Swedish soldier's head once it has been cleaned and bleached and whatnot. And after a quick test, he presumes, because they don't have any technology anymore, he just presumes that what the mother has is brain cancer. And so he essentially is like, there's no hope for her. There's nothing we could do. It would be hard to do anything for her, even in the world before, at this point, because it's like progressed pretty far. So they drug the boy so that he is not very lucid. I guess this is a theme in the 28 Days Later movies, is drugging children so they're not lucid. Ralph Fiennes takes the mother and puts an end to her misery and comes back with her skull for the boy to put in the monument, and he puts it at the very top. Then the boy goes back to his home with the baby and drops her off. I think it's a girl, I actually don't remember. And then he goes out on his own, and this is where we meet Jack O'Connell's character, whose name is Jimmy. And we meet him at the very end, and he's kind of crazy, but we don't really get anything more from him. And then there is a movie that just came out last month called 28 Years Later, Bone Temple, which is, I'm assuming, about Jimmy and Ralph Fiennes' character, and probably the boy as well. But I did not watch it. Not for any particular reason, I just didn't really realize that it had come out. And I was planning on watching it on streaming service before I made this video, but I didn't, which is a good thing because this video is already way too long. Okay. And that's the explanation of the entire plot. So let's go back to 28 Days Later, and I'm going to tell you everything I love about it. I talked a little bit about the visuals and why I think using the camera that they used actually really helped the movie. I mean, it's just you're kind of placed in the story at the same time as Jim. We don't have any idea what's going on any more than Jim, other than what we saw at the very beginning, which was like the context of what the rage virus is and sort of does. But other than that, we don't know anything. So setting it in that position and setting us in that position and then making it something like visually, it's very like discordant with what we're used to seeing the world as, especially in film. I really liked it. It just made it feel almost more real and less like, oh, this is a high budget film, I'm looking through a camera. It kind of felt like I was there. The score is amazing. John Murphy, who also did the new Superman movie, it's so simple. Like, the few songs that you can find on Spotify from this movie, they are so simple, and I think that really just speaks to like, you don't need a big sweeping score to make your movie good. It needs to fit the tone, and I think that they do a great job with that. They also have a rendition of Ave Maria, which I really like. I think the connections between, obviously we don't get to know much about Jim and his relationship with religion or God or the Catholic Church, but his first experience with zombies being in a Catholic church, fighting a Catholic priest, and then the Ave Maria scene plays when Selena, Frank, and Hannah are leaving London. It just feels very thematically important, very hopeful. And then when you have those like louder, bigger orchestral moments in the score, it makes sense because we're allowed to have something quieter in those quiet moments, and then it's undercut by the louder sounds and then hordes of zombies. Yeah, so that's the score. I mean, again, there's not very much of it on Spotify, but it's really good. And then like the sound design is really well done. It's so eerily quiet for so much of the movie. Like I said before, when Jim is walking through London and there's just nothing, it's just quiet. Like when he calls out, you can hear the echo. It's like no place should ever be that quiet. But there's just a lot of space in the movie where they don't have any background music, they're not adding any additional sounds, and it just really settles you in as the viewer into what the people are experiencing, and I think that's wonderful. The acting is just phenomenal. Like, I believed every single character on that stage, on the screen whenever they were performing. I believed them 100%. Cillian Murphy really phenomenal work. I think I've seen, some Cillian Murphy media. I saw him Peaky Blinders, Oppenheimer. I'm sure there's other things that I've seen him in that I can't think of. Oh, what's that movie? Batman, when he's Scarecrow. But I truly think him as Jim is like the most that I've ever believed him. Not that I didn't believe him in any of those other roles, but like, I don't know, him as Jim just was so good. The plot, it's just like this perfect 3-act structure. You know, Jim and Selena, then Jim, Selena, Hank and Hannah, Hank, Frank and Hannah, and then all of them in the military base. It's just so, and you just are with them all the way through. You have really high intense moments of like anxiety and action, and then you have these moments of peace and calm and quiet. Overall, I think it's a phenomenal movie. I love everything about it. I think the way it opened was perfect. I think the way it ended was great. I think that if you don't care about the science behind zombies, it's wonderful. I think if you do care about the science behind zombies, it's wonderful. You know, it does feed into the theme of, you know, what is a monster and what is a man, and when do those two things cross over? Because you have the zombies as these are clearly the enemy, but then you also have, oh, but people are also bad, but also people are good. So I just love that movie. 28 weeks later. Okay, I like this movie. I like this movie a lot. I think it's also tonally consistent with 28 Days Later. There are just some things I think I don't like as much. The lack of hope, for one. This is where you get back to like a more typical zombie type movie. Everything is bad all the time. I don't like that. Also, it doesn't make sense, really. Why would they bring people back there? I think that's the stupidest thing anyone could have ever done. I understand having, you know, tens of thousands of refugees, because the people who survived and who are returning to England are people who were not in England when the outbreak happened. Everyone who was in England when I guess England and Scotland, in the United Kingdom, when the outbreak happened, they're dead, or they're like survivors who are hiding. But those aren't very many. It's like the 2 kids, they were on a trip, like a school trip outside of the UK, and that's why they survived. Ow. And so I don't understand why they would bring people back there, especially since it's only 6 months out from the outbreak. Sure, you think everyone's dead, but things could be contaminated. Blood and saliva like could be everywhere, and you just get that stuff in the wrong place and you have an outbreak all over again. And they do. I think it's kind of a stupid plot. They in my opinion, way overused in the house in a heartbeat. They were like, oh, this ate in the last movie, we're going to use it all the time now. And they use it in the beginning. When Robert Carlyle is running away from the house, they use in the house in a heartbeat. That's actually great because it's like a complete inverse of what we saw in the last movie. Instead of breaking into a place to save someone he loved like Jim was doing, Robert Carlyle is fleeing from the person he loved out of the house to save his own skin. So like that would have been a great use of it. Except then they play it again when the NATO soldiers, including Jeremy Renner, are shooting at the civilians, the non-infected and the infected alike. Another great use of it, but I think if we were gonna it had to be one or the other, right? Had to be one or the other. And then I think they play it again when they leave England. I can't remember exactly, but I think they play it again when the boy and the girl are in the helicopter leaving England, and you see the infected going to Paris. Overused. Do it in one of the other places and those first 2, and I would be happy. I think it would fit. Subverting expectations, great. Using it all those different times was a lot. Seeing the outbreak was really cool. I mean, it sucked. It's horrifying, but I think it's really clever. They do some really interesting things with the science of the virus in this movie because of the genetics factor. Because their mom, whose name is Alice, I think, she is partially immune in that she's asymptomatic, and her son is also immune, and he's immune because of the similarity in their genetics. And they portrayed this, I think, in a very clever way. The mother has heterochromia, and we see pretty early on that Andy, the boy, also has heterochromia. In a video that I was watching by a YouTuber called The Thrifty Typewriter, he was talking about this movie, how I can't remember exactly what he was saying, but it sounded like he was thinking that the heterochromia gene itself is what was preventing the virus. I think that the heterochromia in both mother and son was just a visual for the audience to see that they were genetically similar. I mean, we all know that we have the same genetics as our parents, but like it's different. We have different genetics, otherwise we'd all look the same. But he and his mother are genetically similar enough that they both have heterochromia, so therefore, ipso facto, it could be a logical understanding that then he would also have the genetics that made him immune. Make sense? And because the daughter, has non-heterochromia, is got the same colored eyes, that she could potentially not be immune. These are kind of the assumptions that we're making. That's what I believe. I think that's really a fascinating thing to do. And they also set up both the idea of a cure and the outbreak going international. These things, both of those things, ex-nayed in the next movie. They don't care about it. In the next movie, the rest of the world is perfectly fine, and the United Kingdom has just been quarantined, and that's it. So the whole thing about all those people all the infected going to Paris, doesn't matter. They figured it out. They fixed it. The cure, any idea of the cure, doesn't matter. The potential of the boy being a problem for the rest of the world, doesn't matter. All of that does not matter. I think 28 years later has a completely different vibe. 28 days and 28 weeks later had the same tone, even if they kind of had different themes. 28 days later was a lot more hopeful. 28 weeks later was a lot more, I would almost say, nihilistic in its approach. 28 years later just is kind of an action zombie movie. Nothing about it relates at all to the first two movies other than the rage virus and the continuation of some of like the scientific things. It sounds very different. They have like a whole score. It's just so much its own thing that feels almost like they just put the 28 blank later as like an homage. It's like, it's interesting as well because Danny Boyle did work on 28 Years Later, so it's hard to say any of that. It just feels very different. I want to talk specifically about the song they used in the trailer, the Boots. I thought that in and of itself was, to me, very similar to how 28 Days and 28 Weeks feels. However, that song does not match with the movie, if that makes sense. There's nothing about, I mean, they do some walking, but there's nothing about boots or war, really. You fight some zombies, but it's very much more of like a post-apocalyptic survival film as opposed to what that trailer kind of presented itself as with that song. I think that a much more fitting movie for a song like that would be if we saw the immediate aftermath of the first or even the second outbreak, and what we're seeing is like a soldier and or a doctor trying to contain it, like, or a series of soldiers, a series of doctors trying to contain this outbreak the best that they can, and failing, obviously, because that much more fits with the song, which was a song written about like how the cadence of boots marching can like drive you crazy. It's just that monotonous, like similar repetition, all those words mean the same thing, of like boots hitting the ground and how like that can mess with your brain, with your psyche. And that 28 Years Later just does not feel like that kind of movie. So that's some of the issues I had with it. I mean, it was a fun watch. It was really interesting, especially once you get into the virus and virology. But we'll get to that later. Something I also really liked about 28 Days Later, Jim and the Scottish man. I think, obviously, when it comes to interactions between the Scottish folk and the Irish, I'm not the most well-versed, but there is definite hostilities between the three of them. Justifiably, I would say the Irish and the Scottish aren't always the biggest fans of the English. And what you have in this movie is you have, especially in the third act, once Frank has died, I keep wanting to call him Hank because his daughter's name is Hannah, but once Hank has died, the two good men who were remaining is an Irishman and a Scottish man amidst this group of English soldiers. And I think allowing them to use their like accents, Cillian Murphy's Irish accent and the Scottish man's Scottish accent, as opposed to like having them speak in an English accent, which they could have done. Doing that kind of showed them as outsiders from the get-go. Even if you're just like listening to it and you're like, oh, well, it's an Irish man. Oh, that guy has a Scottish accent. Yay. You're kind of getting this idea that they're different from these other men. And I think that was really clever. I don't know if it was on purpose, but like that's kind of, to me, watching it, definitely had that vibe. So I really appreciated that. You don't really get nuance like that in 28 Years Later. Robert Carlyle is also allowed to have his accent in 28 Weeks Later, but it's not as much of a I wouldn't say it's as much of a big deal, because you also have people with American accents, obviously. Idris Elba, Rose Byrne, and Jeremy Renner. They all have their American accents. So it's not as much of like a thing. But then just 28 Years Later doesn't have any of that nuance. Welcome to the science portion of this video. A warning ahead of time. I am not a biology person. I'm not a chemist. I'm not a virologist. I studied rocks and history. So my understanding of all of this is based off of several videos, 2 from Roanoke Gaming and 1 from the Thrifty Typewriter, where they talk about the science behind the rage virus. And then also my lovely sister, who did study biology and was able to explain some of these concepts to me in a way that my stupid rock brain can understand. Yeah? So forgive me if none of this makes any sense. I've tried to figure out a way that I can explain it in a way that is thorough and yet not overwhelming. Right? Okay, buckle up, folks. Let's try to get into this. So to start, I want to talk about what like the symptoms are that we see in these infected. Obviously, to begin with, they are incredibly full of rage. So it's the rage virus. That's the whole thing. They are incapable of controlling their anger. And that is what is like the main drive for the infected once they have the disease. Additionally, they're also hyped up on adrenaline. We see that they are faster and stronger than your average person for longer. So those two things, the rage and the adrenaline, lead to one to believe that there is an insane hormone imbalance. And we'll talk about why that could be and how that happened. They also have red eyes. All their capillaries have burst. They are not dead. They are infected, but you can kill them. They also still do have some brain function because they're not dead, and it's not like the fungus in The Last of Us where it just kind of overwrites the whole person. There is some person left. We see that in 28 Days Later when there is a little boy who is infected but can still speak. All he says is, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you, but he is still like capable of speaking, so that does speak to a higher brain function. And then in 28 Weeks Later, Robert Carlyle's character is hunting down and like his own children, and he also seems to have this ability to like sneak and hide and think, as opposed to other zombies infected that are just like running at you, trying to get you. He has some kind of brain function. And then again, we see in 28 Years Later, people have kind of reformed their communities, if that makes sense. And by people, I mean the infected. We have like tribes of infected being led by an alpha. So this speaks to a higher brain function. These people are still alive and they are still people, which kind of adds another level of horror to it. The infected can still starve to death. I think I mentioned that earlier when we talked about 28 Weeks Later, how all of the infected starved, and that's why they were returning people to England. There are 4 variations of infected, as we see later in 28 Years Later. There's the typical ones that we see throughout 28 weeks, 28 days, and 28 years. And then there are the crawlers, which are larger bodied and they crawl. They typically just eat worms. They don't seem to be part of the social hierarchy. Same with the emaciated. They also don't seem to be a part of a social hierarchy. They seem to be outcasted. They are kind of self-explanatory. They're very, very thin, very skeletal. And then the fourth being the alphas. These ones are large, if you want to say that. Those of you who have seen this movie, wowza, are they big. And they are leaders. They're alphas. They're leaders of the group. So we'll talk about all of those, and Roanoke Gaming's video on the different variations is like where I got all of this information from about them. So his channel has a lot more like in-depth science. I'm just going to give you the basic bare bones of what I can understand because I am not as smart as him. So if you want like a much more in-detailed, Roanoke Gaming has that video. And then another thing is that they can reproduce. The infected can reproduce, and not just by biting people and reproducing that way. You know, the men and the women can have a baby, and that is something that is very integral, I believe, to how this virus functions. So the basics of the virus is it was created in a lab in Cambridge by some scientists who were trying to eradicate the rage hormone or chemical from the human psyche. Specifically in violent criminals, they're trying to like end violence as a whole. They have like in the beginning of the first movie, you see like flashes on these TV screens that they're showing these apes like violence throughout the world through all time, you know, like riots and police brutality and war and bombing and like stabbing, like all those things that are bad, right? And their whole impetus is we're going to stop that from happening by inhibiting the rage hormone. And so they genetically modify a strain of Ebola to be able to do this. They chose Ebola because it is incredibly contagious, and they were intending to release this anti-rage drug or virus on people unwillingly. They were hoping to just spread it out and that people would get it and that rage would be eradicated. So it's incredibly contagious, and it is spread through a swap of bodily fluids such as blood or saliva, and I would imagine mucus. So if you get blood, saliva, or like mucus, like a sneeze of an infected person into your bloodstream, then you're done for. You got 20 to 40 seconds before you're gone. That could mean a bite. So if they've broken your skin, then their saliva is in your, blood. Or if you have a cut and their blood or saliva gets in there. But, if you're making out, we saw that earlier. And then any kind of cross-contamination of a mucous membrane, which is like the soft squishy parts inside of your mouth, your eyes, or your nose. That is also, you get any blood or saliva of an infected in there, you're done for. Which is exactly why 28 weeks later doesn't make sense. It's only been 6 months. These people's blood and spit is probably still all over the place. Okay. I'm just still bothered by that, I think, clearly. So that's why they chose Ebola. That's how it's passed around, this virus. Then what happened? Why did it go from being an anti-rage virus to a rage virus? Why did it infect people and make them angrier? The explanation in the movie is that when they put the virus and they tested it on the apes in the lab, it mutated inside of the apes. So instead of them being more docile, they became even more enraged. And not only is this just like rage in general, at one point when one of the women is like killing the guys after she's infected by an ape, you see another ape in a cage clapping. So it's not just like rage for the sake of rage. They get enjoyment out of it. At least that's kind of what that seemed like. You can't see that so much in the rest of the movies. Like, you don't see any people like infected doing that, but you do see that there. So it also speaks to a higher brain function. They're not just like empty vessels or shells or whatever. Okay, so how does this virus work? So in your brain, you have 3 parts that really affect your emotional regulation. Let's see, I know I have a list. I have a list and what they do. Okay, you have your prefrontal cortex, which kind of affects your moral judgments. Your amygdala, which is where your aggression, your maternal instincts, your fear is harbored, but then also like your kind of what you would call a knee-jerk reaction. So like if you touch something and it's hot, your whole brain isn't like gonna think, this is hot, I have to move my hand. Your amygdala is just gonna be like, get your hand out of there, move your hand. At least that's how it's been explained to me. And then your frontal lobe is another part of this. So when any of those things are damaged, especially when all of those things are damaged, that can lead to an alteration of emotional regulation, and a lack of anger management. You can sometimes see that in people who have had like traumatic brain injuries, not all the time, but sometimes, or diseases that attack the brain, that irritability or even anger is more common, like can happen more often than how they were prior to the injury or the disease. And this is kind of like the crux of the rage virus, is that it has damaged the brain. There is like permanent brain problems going on. So even if there was a cure to the virus itself, the damage is still there. The damage is done, and that sucks. Oh god. Jeez. Okay, and so what the cure does, not the cure, in your brain you have neurons, and this is like how messages are sent throughout the brain. This is like a neural pathway is what these are called when you have all these bits connected. And there are several like very vital parts of the neuron that we will talk about. So this is a whole neuron, and at the top you have the dendrites. I was really happy about this word because we have dendrites in geology as well. So I was like, I know what that is. I mean, they're obviously different, but they kind of have this similar look. So you have the dendrites, and then the cell body, I guess, and then you have this long line, which is the axon, and then you have at the bottom more little things, and those are the synapse. Between the synapse of one neuron and the dendrites of the next neuron is a synaptic gap, and it is on the top of the dendrites between the synapse in that synaptic gap where there are receptors. Yeah, and those are they receive from the previous neuron a copy of the information that the brain is trying to process. We good? We got that? This is what's happening in our brains like as we speak, which is kind of crazy. So it's kind of like if you had a relay race, and I'm giving you not my baton, of course, because that's my baton, but a copy of my baton. I'm giving it to you, and you're the other neuron, and I'm one neuron, and your little hand where I'm going to put your baton, which is a copy of my baton, is the receptor on your dendrites. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense. My sister and I came up with so many incredibly convoluted analogies to try to explain this, and I don't think I'm going to use most of them because they make no sense, frankly. I mean, it made sense to us when we were talking about it, but I don't think it makes sense now. Hopefully that analogy makes sense. The anti-rage virus was supposed to do was block those receptors from receiving the rage hormone or the rage chemical. I don't know which one it is. Whatever. Maybe it's both. Maybe they're the same thing. I don't know. The virus was supposed to stop that from happening. Instead, what it did when it mutated inside the ape is it exacerbated it. It made it worse. It inflooded the brain with production of rage and damaged the brain so that all of those processes which make us as humans able to control our emotions and regulate and not eat people, it just damaged it. It broke it. So that's kind of the very basic. So the damage obviously led to the increase in certain hormones and certain chemicals. That's kind of the basics of the disease. That's all you see pretty much in 28 days later. There's not a lot more that you can kind of glean from it. You have the over influx of rage, you have the increased adrenaline, you have the capillaries burst, the brain damage, the way that it's passed from person to person. But then we get to 28 weeks later and we learn some really interesting stuff. And that's about carrier status. So we all lived through COVID, right? We all did that. And one thing that we talked about a lot during COVID was people who are asymptomatic and they can still be carriers, which is why it was so important for everyone to wear a mask, even if they didn't feel sick, stay at home, even if you don't feel sick, you can still have the disease. And that's something that happens in the second movie. We talked about it a little bit, how the Robert Carlyle's wife, her name is possibly Alice, she was infected, but she was asymptomatic. Other than the one burst capillary in her, or one eye that had burst capillaries, she had no symptoms. It could be a little bit of symptomatic showing where she is a little bit more aggressive, but not violent. You sort of see that when she first finds her son. He hugs her and she hugs him back, but then she's squeezing way too tight and you're oh my gosh, she's gonna kill him. But she doesn't, because her amygdala is still intact, her maternal instincts are still there. There is just a little bit more wonk in her brain. So she is a carrier though. She is infected, and we do see that, and that's how the outbreak occurs a second time. And this carrier status can be based on genetics. There are other things that it could be, but based on how the movie goes, it's most definitely genetics. And we talked about Andy being bitten by Robert Carlyle, his father, and then getting the virus. You can see the capillaries in his eyes burst, but then he is asymptomatic. And that is likely because he has very similar genes to his mother. And we can see that visually through his heterochromia. I think we talked about this. Okay, now we get to 28 years later. One thing that I think is interesting is between 28 days and 28 weeks, we don't see any variants. Not that we would, because in 28 weeks they're all dead, but we don't hear about any variants. We don't hear about anything these ones are more like this, or this one's more like this. And in 28 weeks later, we only have one kind. So I'm prone to believe that when Alice bit Dawn, which I think is Robert Carlyle's character's name, I don't know why that suddenly came to me, something in there mutated the disease again. So it mutated in the apes when they were being tested on, and then I think when she got it, it mutated again. And then she passed the mutated version on to her husband, Robert Carlyle, which is something that we also do see in viruses that we all get. If I get something from my brother, it could be different than how when he got it, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. So that's how I think we got to where we get to with the different variations. It's just a different strain, a different mutation, and it's also been 28 years, so a lot can happen, a lot can mutate in 28 years. Things evolve, things change, and that includes viruses. So the 4 variants, we talked about them earlier. The endocrine system. This is what controls your hormones. This is what controls how much is being produced. And we've talked about earlier that the rage virus affects how much is being produced. So there's an effect to your endocrine system. And what Roanoke Gaming proposes is that whatever that last hormone that the brain told the endocrine system to produce, I think that's how that works, that is the last signal that the endocrine system got from the brain. And so therefore it's the one that it's going to continue to produce, because the communication between brain and body and brain has been wiped. So the brain can't communicate with the rest of the body as the way it did before. So it can't tell it, you don't have to produce that specific hormone anymore. We're good. All it knows, and it being the endocrine system, all the endocrine system knows is produce this, produce this, produce this. That's what the brain told me to do. That's what I'm doing. I'm doing my job. Very Wall-E and Wall-E, if one would say that. Anyway, so for example, the crawlers, it could be that the last hormone that the brain told the endocrine system to produce was cortisol, which is the anxiety hormone or the anxiety chemical. It makes sense, especially for people more prone to anxiety. You're in the zombie apocalypse, you're going to be a little bit anxious, right? And so the influx of cortisol, like over and over and over and over in this body, could be the reason that the body is reacting the way it is. So it could be that the cortisol triggered the body to siphon all the food consumption into fat stores, which leads to slower, larger infected who are endlessly hungry. That could be a direct quote from Roanoke Gaming. I actually didn't write down if that was a direct quote. It could be a direct quote. Again, if you want more in-depth science stuff, Roanoke Gaming, he knows what's up. He knows what's up. I do not. Similar with the emaciated variant, their body's natural response to a virus could be to attack it way too hard, way too much. And so their immediate response to having a virus in their body could have been for everything in the body to attack the virus 100,000%, which is sometimes what happens to people. And so their metabolism goes through the roof because they're burning through their food stores to attack the virus. And instead of using those food stores to keep the body alive, they're just attacking the virus. Yeah? And so they get emaciated because they don't have enough food. This could also be why they are removed from the groups, why you don't see them with in the social hierarchy in the tribes, as Roanoke Gaming called them, tribes, groups, clans, whatever. You don't see them there. It's possible that they have been removed because they eat too much. They need too much to eat to keep their body functioning, and so to keep the group safe, they were removed. Yes, and because the information is no longer passing between the brain and body, there's nothing to tell the endocrine system, the hypothalamus or whatever, to slow the metabolism back down. That just doesn't exist. The alphas, he essentially just kind of said that these people probably just had more testosterone in their body. And so when the whole thing happened with the infection, when the infection hit, it's just constantly producing testosterone. So that's why they get really big. And then he talks about the human growth hormone and how that continues to grow muscle and how that could be seen by the others as that's a big powerful leader, kind of like you have lions, I guess. You have a big lion fighting another big lion, and the biggest lion gets to win, and we're all part of his pride now. I guess it's something like that. So that's kind of how that works. And then with the babies, obviously I mentioned that earlier, that the infected can have babies, and these babies aren't infected. I think that was one of the coolest parts of Roanoke Gaming's video, was talking about the babies and how a mother's body is just built to keep your baby safe. And one thing that's really important, and which makes a lot of sense, is that blood never passes directly between a mother and a baby. It's the blood vessels, I think, of the baby and the mom, or at least in the placental wall. The blood is just going close enough to one another that they're passing oxygen and carbon dioxide back and forth. Yeah, isn't that crazy? The baby's born, it's not infected upon its birth. However, the moment that it, suckles, drinks its first drop of milk, the milk inside the mother will probably have the infection. I don't remember why, but something to do with the blood, something. It would be infected upon its first feeding. However, it does have some of that natural immunity, so it's possible that the infection wouldn't affect it as much as it would someone else, if that makes sense. So as these infected are reproducing, it is possible that the infection would dwindle in its intenseness, which I think is pretty crazy. So we could have another movie that takes place in a lot more time where England is re-inhabited, but not by uninfected, but by the infected who are less infected. And I just think that's pretty cool. And I do like that. As I said at the beginning, I'm a very hopeful person, and that kind of feels like hope. That's the best cure that we could possibly have, is that, because you can't, like I was saying earlier, you can cure the virus, but you can't take away the symptoms. The brain is damaged. When you have the virus, the brain is damaged. Whether or not the virus is there anymore, the damage is done. But if little by little, generation by generation, this virus is being eradicated through the natural human process, like of the human body, I think that is insane and so wild. These scientists were trying to eradicate a human function of rage, whether we like it or not. Like, rage is part of us, and most of us are just capable of regulating it. Some people just aren't, and they were trying to take that away, and in doing so really set back a lot of people for a long time. But there is that hope that it could get better, and I just think that kind of is a full circle moment. That is something I do like about 28 Days Later, or years later. There's a lot of other things I just didn't like about that movie, but we already talked about that. But that idea that things can get better naturally through the natural process that is built into us, I think that was really fabulous. This is my video on the 28 Days Later movies. Incredibly way too long, but if you're here, thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. I hope that you have enjoyed it as much as I have. I have like notes, pages and pages of notes about genetics and biology and stupid analogies about restaurants and parking lots for how the brain works, because I didn't understand any of this. I feel like I've learned a lot. I hope you've learned some. I hope you go over to these other channels to check them out. Also, Cinema Wins did 2 videos on the 28 Days Later and the 28 Weeks Later movies. Loved those videos as well. Go check those out. Thank you to my sister for sitting down for hours on end to explain to me how viruses work and how the brain functions. It has been a lot of help. If you liked the video, let me know down below in the comments. Like and subscribe if you want to. You don't have to. Yeah, I hope that you guys are having a great day. Thank you for being here. Don't get infected out there. Do your best not to get infected by zombies, especially these ones. Actually, honestly, these are kind of, I don't know. If I was to be infected by any zombie in media, what zombie would it be? Well, let me know what you think. If you were to be a zombie, I feel like I'd want to be a feral ghoul from Fallout, just because they kind of got drip, I don't know, they're kind of cool. And you can still be like mostly human because they're just radiated. So let me know what kind of zombie you'd want to be, and I'll catch you in the next one. I don't know what I'm going to do for the next one. It'll be a surprise to us both. Yay! I'll see you later.